Child disappearances are exploding right now. It's a crisis we can't ignore. Here are the 4 most disturbing missing cases, and shockingly, they're all tied to the closest people in these kids' lives, even their own parents. Trust me, they're way darker than you imagine. What's even more alarming is how recent most of these are. William Tyrrell back in 2014, Gus Lamont and its eerie parallels hitting in the second half of 2025, and the most severe one that'll make you question the house next door, or maybe your own family. So, what if the real danger isn't strangers, but the violence brewing right at home? William Tyrrell came into the world on June 26, 2011, in Sydney, Australia, entering a life that would soon be marked by profound tragedy. From his earliest days, his path seemed fraught with challenges, though the full extent of his unfortunate fate wouldn't unfold until years later. By the time of the incident that captured national attention, he had been placed in a foster home, living with his foster parents, in a seemingly stable environment in Sydney. We started piecing this together for our channel, looking at how a routine family visit turned into one of Australia's most baffling cases. On September 11, 2014, the family traveled to Kendal, a quiet town in New South Wales, to visit his foster grandmother at her home on Benaroon Drive. It was meant to be a short, unremarkable trip, but the next day would shatter that illusion. The morning of September 12 started like any other for a 3-year-old boy full of energy. William, dressed in his favorite Spider-Man outfit, was playing in the front yard with his 5-year-old foster sister. They were engaged in a simple game of pretending to be tigers, roaring and chasing each other around the property. The foster mother, whom we'll refer to as Jane for clarity in our analysis, was inside the house, sipping coffee and watching them from the deck. At around 10:25 a.m., William ran around the side of the house, letting out one last playful roar. Then, silence. No cries, no sounds of struggle, no witnesses to what happened next. He simply vanished. Jane later recounted that she expected him to reappear any moment, but when he didn't, she began searching the yard and the house. After about 5 minutes of growing concern, she realized something was terribly wrong. Panic set in quickly. Jane called emergency services at 10:57 a.m., reporting that her foster son was missing. Police arrived on the scene by 11:06 a.m., initiating what would become an exhaustive search. Initially, the focus was on the possibility of an abduction by a stranger, perhaps someone who had spotted the child playing outside and seized the opportunity in that remote, wooded area. Neighbors joined the effort, combing the surrounding bushland, but no trace emerged. We examined the early hours in our research, noting how the lack of immediate clues shifted the narrative from a potential kidnapping to something more sinister over time. By September 16, authorities formed Strike Force Roseanne, a dedicated team of 14 detectives tasked with unraveling the mystery. Their work would span years, involving over 690 persons of interest, more than 2,800 calls to Crime Stoppers, around 1,000 interviews, and a staggering 11,000 documents. As the investigation dragged on without resolution, a reward of $1 million Australian dollars was announced on September 12, 2016, in hopes of encouraging tips that could crack the case. Yet, even with this incentive, leads dried up. By 2025, marking 11 years since his disappearance, William is presumed dead, though his remains have never been found. The case remains active, a haunting reminder of how a child's life can end in uncertainty. In our breakdown, we see this as emblematic of true crime stories where initial assumptions give way to deeper suspicions, particularly when family dynamics come under scrutiny. The scale of the probe underscores the resources poured in, yet the absence of closure amplifies the tragedy of William's short, ill-fated existence. Shifting to the foster parents, several elements in their accounts raised red flags for investigators. Jane's recollection of the events placed her as the last person to see William alive. She described watching him run to the side of the house, imitating a tiger's roar, before he disappeared from view. The sudden quiet that followed struck her as odd, but she didn't immediately alarm others. Instead, she conducted a brief search of the property herself. Only after those few minutes did she alert her foster husband, Paul, who had just returned from a work-related errand in nearby Lakewood. Paul joined the search, checking the streets and knocking on neighbors' doors, but their efforts yielded nothing. We delved into these timelines during our preparation, noting how such details can seem innocuous at first but become pivotal under closer examination. One of the more troubling aspects was the inconsistencies in Jane's timeline. Over the years, Her statements to authorities showed minor discrepancies, which led to formal accusations. In 2022, she faced charges of providing false information to the NSW Crime Commission, though she was later acquitted. This episode highlighted potential gaps in her narrative, fueling speculation about what might have been omitted. By 2021, both Jane and the foster grandmother, who has since passed away, were officially named as persons of interest. The scrutiny intensified around incidents possibly linked to the home environment, including questions about whether the victim could have fallen from a balcony on the property. This theory tied into broader concerns about accidental harm and subsequent cover-ups. Further complicating matters, in 2023, police recommended charging Jane with obstructing justice and interfering with remains. The allegation centered on the idea that she might have concealed an accidental death and hidden the boy's remains to avoid consequences. Such accusations pointed to a motive rooted in preserving their family unit, as any admission of negligence could jeopardize their foster status. Paul, while not directly accused in the same manner, was part of the household dynamic under review. His return from the errand coincided closely with the disappearance, prompting questions about whether he arrived earlier than stated or played a role in any aftermath. In 2017, the foster parents appeared on a television program without showing their faces, discussing the ordeal, but this did little to quell doubts. We considered these points in our analysis, seeing them as classic red flags in cases where family members' stories don't fully align. The foster family's overall behavior added layers of intrigue. For instance, the delay in calling authorities, nearly 30 minutes after Jane first noticed William missing, struck some as unusual, though it could be attributed to initial disbelief. Paul's actions upon returning, focusing on external searches rather than a thorough check of the immediate area, also drew attention. Moreover, the property's layout, with its balcony and surrounding terrain, offered multiple scenarios for mishaps that might not have been reported accurately. These elements collectively painted a picture of a household where something went awry, and the responses seemed calculated to deflect blame. In true crime fashion, such peculiarities often signal deeper issues, and here they pivoted the investigation toward internal factors rather than external threats. Turning to the most reliable hypothesis, an accident and a cover-up, this emerged as a leading theory after initial abduction ideas faded. From 2021 onward, detectives pursued the notion that the victim suffered a fall from the balcony at the foster grandmother's house. The structure overlooked a drop that could cause injuries like the announced death, cause, and reconstruction suggested he might have climbed or leaned over, leading to a tragic accident. In this scenario, panic ensued, and rather than reporting it immediately, those present allegedly decided to conceal the incident. Jane, in particular, faced suspicions of orchestrating the cover-up, perhaps by moving and hiding the remains before alerting police. This would explain the absence of any body or evidence at the scene, transforming an accident into a staged disappearance. Supporting this, investigators conducted renewed searches in 2021 across 3 key areas near Kendall, operating under the assumption that remains had been deliberately disposed of nearby. Divers scoured waterways, forensic teams sifted through soil, and cadaver dogs were deployed, but nothing conclusive surfaced. The theory posited that the cover-up was motivated by fear of losing custody or facing legal repercussions for mistreatment or negligence. Another variant involved a possible vehicle-related accident, where William might have been struck accidentally while playing, prompting a similar response of concealment to evade scrutiny. We explored these angles, noting how they fit patterns in other cases where families prioritize self-preservation over transparency. A key piece came from a witness named in 2021, who testified that 2 brothers had observed a local resident burying a suitcase believed to contain the victim's remains. This account, while unverified, aligned with the cover-up narrative, suggesting involvement from someone close to the family or the property. Earlier theories of abduction by strangers or connections to organized networks exploiting children were gradually dismissed as evidence pointed inward. For example, initial leads on suspicious vehicles in the area, a gray sedan or a white car, led nowhere definitive, shifting focus back to the home. By 2024, fresh details from police reinforced the balcony fall hypothesis. Reports outlined how the height and William's playful nature could have combined disastrously, with subsequent actions aimed at fabricating a kidnapping story. This included potential staging of the scene to suggest an outsider's involvement, such as leaving no signs of struggle. The persistence of this theory, even without remains, underscores the investigative pivot from broad searches for a live child to targeted probes for hidden evidence of an accident. In our channel's take, this evolution reflects the grim reality that William's unlucky streak culminated in a preventable end, shrouded in deception. Expanding on the oddities surrounding the foster parents, Jane's emotional responses during early interviews appeared controlled, which some interpreted as detachment rather than grief. Paul's errand to Lakewood, a short drive away, raised timing questions. Did he truly leave and return as claimed, or was there overlap with the disappearance? The property itself held peculiarities. The balcony lacked child-proof barriers adequate for an active toddler, hinting at oversight and safety measures. Moreover, the 5-minute search window before escalating seemed brief for a thorough check, potentially indicating prior knowledge of what transpired. The 2022 charges against Jane for misleading authorities stemmed from discrepancies in her descriptions of that morning's events, like the exact sequence of her movements. Though acquitted, the episode exposed fractures in her credibility. The 2023 recommendations for charges went further, alleging direct interference with remains, implying she or others relocated them to a remote spot. This fit with the 2021 searches, where areas like dense bushland and nearby dams were prioritized based on tips and forensic logic. Tanya's testimony added a chilling layer. The brothers' sighting of the burial involved a suitcase, a method that could conceal small remains easily, perhaps dumped in haste. In dissecting the accident theory, we note how it accounts for the silence, no screams if the fall was swift and fatal. The cover-up would then involve quick decisions wrapping and transporting remains before calling for help. Motives tie back to the foster system's strict oversight. Any hint of mistreatment could revoke their status, especially with another child in the home. Vehicle accident variants suggest perhaps William wandered into the driveway, struck by a car backing up, prompting a similar panic. Dismissed abduction leads, like the supposed pedophile networks in the region, were ruled out after vetting local registries, leaving family-centric explanations dominant. Beyond the evidence and behaviors from the foster parents that clearly point to their involvement in the case, another aspect has been highlighted extensively from the start for enabling so many conditions that allowed this tragedy to unfold: the child care and adoption system. William Tyrrell was born into a family already plagued by domestic violence, mistreatment, and stuck with the problems of controlled substances, an overall unsafe environment for children. His biological parents were Brendan Tyrrell, also known as Brendan Collins, and Carly Tyrrell. From a young age, William and his sister were removed from their biological home due to these issues. Under the oversight of NSW Family and Community Services, William was ordered to be taken from his biological parents at just 7 months old. In a desperate bid to keep him, his biological parents fled with him for about 6 weeks in early 2012, sparking a nationwide manhunt because they didn't want him placed in foster care. Ultimately, at around 8 months old, William was removed from his biological parents and entered the foster system. The environment he came from was deemed entirely unsuitable, leading to him being earmarked for a new home. His biological parents later appeared at the 2019 inquest, where they explained their reasons for fleeing with him. After his removal, William was placed in foster care amid ongoing concerns about his nurturing environment. Life for children like William in those early stages is often seen as overwhelming and confusing as they try to make sense of the world around them. He began living with his foster parents at 9 months old in March 2012, and the formal adoption process started on September 5, 2013. William was adopted by his foster parents, initially anonymous but later identified as Jane and Paul, before his disappearance in 2014. The inquest timeline covered these key milestones from his removal to the foster parents' involvement, with the inquest itself beginning in March 2019. His biological mother broke her silence on the matter, and there were 2 families entangled: the biological one and the foster one. William was in the foster care system at the time of his vanishing. This background ties directly into the criticisms of the system's injustices during William's adoption period. The Australian Child Protection Service, known as FACS or Family and Community Services, faced backlash for failing to monitor closely after adoption, allowing children to be exposed to potentially risky environments. Laws restricting the disclosure of adoption status prevented biological parents from making public appeals, a point criticized by the father of Daniel Morecombe for hindering investigations. The NSW government refused to lift bans on parents speaking out, prioritizing child safety and investigative integrity. In 2017, the NSW Supreme Court ruled that adoption status was in the public interest. There were failures in coordination between social services, family courts, and police, resulting in children being placed in dangerous situations. Documents confirmed William's adoption started on September 5, 2013, but oversight was inadequate. At the core, the foster parent system showed biases, treating wealthy couples differently from poorer families labeled as bogans. Suggestions emerged that the foster system itself had flaws, contributing to speculations about the foster family and the overall handling of the case. The system's disregard for the foster family's history of mistreatment amplified these issues. William's former foster mother had a conviction overturned related to assaulting and threatening another child in their care. The foster parents were convicted of intimidating a different child under their supervision, though cleared of some other domestic violence charges. Secret recordings played in court revealed threats made by the foster parents toward that child. Signs of mistreatment in William could have manifested through negligence or harsher actions, potentially culminating in the events that day. Gus Lamont. Another case that's grabbing attention right now surprisingly plays out in a script almost identical to the William Tyrrell case in 2013, and moreover, right in Australia itself. We started looking into the Gus Lamont disappearance for our channel, piecing together the details from available reports to see how it mirrors those earlier patterns of sudden vanishing in remote areas. Gus Lamont, whose full name is August Gus Lamont, was a 4-year-old boy who went missing on September 27, 2025, from his family's isolated sheep farm near Yunta, about 300 kilometers from Adelaide in South Australia. The farm sits in the harsh outback, a place where vast emptiness stretches out, making any disappearance feel even more inexplicable. He was last seen playing outside in the afternoon during the AFL Grand Final, a day when families across the country were tuned into the game. But for the Lamonts, it turned into a nightmare. Gus simply vanished without a trace, no screams, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away into the scrub. This sudden absence in such a wide-open, yet unforgiving landscape has left everyone scratching their heads, as if the earth just swallowed him up. In our review of the timeline, the family reported him missing after he slipped out of sight, prompting an immediate and extensive search operation. Teams scoured the area using indigenous trackers familiar with the terrain, police dogs trained to pick up scents, and advanced technology like drones and thermal imaging. Despite all that effort, nothing turned up, not a shred of clothing, not a single clue. The outback's vastness plays into this mystery, with its endless dunes and hidden crevices that could conceal anything, but the complete lack of evidence makes it hard to fathom how a child could disappear so thoroughly. The case quickly drew national focus, with experts weighing in on possible locations where a young boy might wander or hide, yet weeks passed without any breakthrough. This baffling element echoes cases where kids vanish in rural settings, leaving investigators to question if something more deliberate was at play, like an accident quickly covered up to avoid scrutiny. By October 16, 2025, South Australian police scaled back the official search after a few weeks, citing no new evidence despite exhaustive efforts. This decision amplified the puzzle, as it raised questions about how a 4-year-old could evade detection in a searched radius that should have covered his possible movements. Then, a month later on October 27, new theories surfaced about the distance a child his age could realistically walk, factoring in fatigue and the terrain's demands. But these ideas didn't resolve the core enigma. We noted in our notes how this progression feels like a slow burn in true crime narratives, where initial hope fades into lingering doubt, hinting at foul play or negligence hidden behind the family's story. The absence of any physical trail suggests perhaps an incident closer to home, swiftly managed to look like a random loss in the wilderness. Turning to the scarcity of witnesses, that's another layer that complicates everything. Only Gus's grandmother was the last to see him, spotting him playing outdoors before he vanished. In such a remote spot, there were no other eyes around, no neighbors close by, no passers-by on a quiet road. This isolation makes verifying the exact sequence of events tough, relying solely on family accounts for the timeline. One potential sighting came from a witness, who claimed to have seen a boy matching Gus's description with an unknown man about 100 kilometers from Yunta, but authorities dismissed it after determining the images involved were fabricated. No local residents or tourists reported anything significant, even though the farm is in a sparsely populated outback region lacking surveillance cameras or video evidence. The broad searches turned up empty in terms of corroborating accounts, forcing reliance on what the family provided, which naturally sparks questions about the accuracy and completeness of that information. This lack of external validation feeds into suspicions, especially when considering how true crime cases often hinge on independent corroboration. Without it, the narrative stays confined to the household's perspective, potentially overlooking details that could point to an accident, maybe a fall into a hidden hazard, that was then obscured. We discussed in our team how this witness void is reminiscent of other rural disappearances, where the remoteness itself becomes a barrier to truth, allowing for scenarios where family members might alter facts to shield themselves from blame. Delving deeper into the family conflicts and the hazardous living conditions, the Lamonts resided on a sheep farm in the outback, an environment riddled with dangers. The landscape includes expansive deserts, water dams, wild animals, and extreme weather that can turn deadly fast, heightening risks like getting lost, dehydration, or drowning for a small child. Kids in these settings are particularly vulnerable, with little oversight beyond family, leading to theories of an accident covered up, or even domestic violence escalating unnoticed. The rural setup lacks the checks and balances of urban areas, where neighbors or services might intervene, so children face amplified perils from the terrain alone. Police even drain nearby dams to rule out drowning, underscoring how those water sources pose immediate threats in such isolated spots. The family dynamics add complexity, with underlying tensions that have surfaced through public scrutiny. Rumors and hostile comments have targeted them, suggesting they might be hiding truths, perhaps to conceal an mishap at home. This points to possible lie of an accident, where something tragic happened on the property, and the story of wandering off was crafted to divert attention. The farm's remoteness means systems for child protection are stretched thin, criticized for not stepping in sooner in high-risk rural homes. This case highlights broader issues for kids in outback or border areas, where vulnerability is compounded by distance from help. In our analysis, we see how these elements intertwine. The dangerous surroundings could easily lead to a fatal slip, and family rifts might motivate a quick cover to avoid legal fallout or loss of custody. For instance, imagine a scenario where Gus, plain unsupervised, encounters one of the farm's hazards, a deep gully or an unstable structure, and suffers a fatal injury. Panicked family members, aware of prior conflicts or scrutiny, decide to hide the remains and report a disappearance instead. This isn't uncommon in true crime. We've seen similar patterns where isolation enables such actions. The outback's unforgiving nature would make disposal feasible without immediate detection, explaining the fruitless searches. Police efforts to check dams and other spots show they're considering these possibilities. But without evidence, it stays speculative. The family's complex history, though not fully detailed publicly, fuels these ideas, as tensions could erupt in moments of stress, leading to unintended harm quickly swept under the rug. The concerning silence from the Lamont family members stands out as particularly troubling. After the initial report, they've remained remarkably quiet, offering few public appearances or updates, which has stirred doubts among observers. Even as the case stretched beyond a month, there were no comments from them on emerging theories or ongoing searches. This reticence complicates the investigation, with only the grandmother's early statement providing a foundation, and no further details from other relatives. The lack of transparency has drawn criticism, amplifying rumors of a cover-up, as if they're avoiding questions that might reveal inconsistencies. In true crime terms, this quietude often signals something deeper, perhaps guilt over an accident or fear of exposure. We pondered how families in these situations sometimes withdraw to protect secrets, like if mistreatment played a role leading to the incident. For example, if there was negligence or a heated argument resulting in harm, the silence could be a strategy to let time dilute suspicion. Police have continued probing into November 2025, with the case still open and no signs Gus is alive. But the family's minimal engagement leaves gaps. This pattern of withdrawal mirrors other cases where relatives know more than they share, possibly hiding an accidental death to evade charges. Authorities dismissed circulating fake images of the missing boy, noting how AI-generated content hinders probes by creating false leads. Experts like indigenous trackers and former detectives offered views on potential locations, but nothing panned out. These elements underscore the investigation's challenges in such a remote context, where technology clashes with nature's barriers. The ongoing nature of the case, into late 2025, keeps hope faint while suspicions grow, particularly around the idea of a home-based accident concealed to maintain the family's facade. The witness scarcity ties back here too, with no outsiders, any cover-up stays internal. The dismissed sighting with the fake photo shows how misinformation can derail focus, but the core issue remains the reliance on family testimony. Their silence, extending through the search suspension and beyond, suggests a deliberate choice, maybe to avoid slipping up on details that don't align. In our channel Prep, we see this as a red flag, common in cases where an accident turns into a calculated deception. Furthermore, the national attention brought experts analyzing child mobility in harsh terrains, estimating Gus couldn't have gone far without leaving signs, which bolsters accident theories closer to the farm. If mistreatment was involved, say, rough handling leading to injury, the remote setting allows for immediate handling without witnesses. The grandmother's sole account becomes pivotal, but without corroboration, it invites doubt. Police persistence into November indicates they're exploring these angles, perhaps interviewing family under the radar. The outback's isolation also critiques child welfare systems, slow to act in distant areas, potentially missing signs of family strain that could precipitate tragedy. If tensions existed, an unsupervised play session might have escalated into harm, followed by a group decision to stage a disappearance. This GIP a Chile motivated by fear, losing the farm, facing prosecution, or fracturing the family unit. True crime often reveals such motives in rural settings, where self-reliance turns to self-protection. Stop the part of the family members? Let's move to another strange detail we've uncovered in the Gus Lamont case revolves around another disappearance that happened almost simultaneously and in strikingly close proximity, raising all sorts of questions about potential connections. Benjamin, a 40-year-old man, went missing on September 26, 2025, near Wirramina in South Australia, just a day before or possibly overlapping with Gus's vanishing from his family's remote sheep farm near Yunta. While some reports pin Gus's disappearance to the 27th, others align it with the 26th, emphasizing the eerie timing in this isolated outback region. Benjamin was last seen driving erratically around Glendambo, as reported by truck drivers, in his blue Hyundai hatchback. His vehicle was later found abandoned in the bush near Wirramina, prompting a massive search by police, SES volunteers, and local trackers. They discovered footprints and other signs, but no trace of Benjamin himself, and the operation was scaled back on October 3, 2025, due to the challenging terrain filled with dense scrub. South Australian police handled Benjamin's case through their missing persons investigation section, keeping all scenarios open, without evidence pointing to any specific outcome. They've appealed for information from anyone on the Sturt Highway, between Port Augusta and Glendambo, that day who might have spotted the car, or Benjamin. Both disappearances unfolded in remote parts of South Australia, Benjamin near Wirramina and Glendambo, Gus near Yunta, creating a geographical closeness that's hard to ignore in such sparsely populated areas. The parallel timelines stand out, two people vanishing around the same day in the outback, with no immediate explanations. Searches in both cases turned up tracks and clues, but led nowhere, and both efforts were downsized because of the difficult landscape, leaving investigators frustrated. We started cross-referencing these in our research, noting how Benjamin's abandoned car was discovered shortly after his disappearance, mirroring the unexplained nature of Gus slipping away from the farm without a sound. There's no direct evidence linking the two, but the coincidences have sparked speculation about hidden ties, maybe a third party involved, or environmental factors at play. The outback's vastness could hide accidents or foul play, and with Benjamin's erratic driving reported, it's possible he wandered into the same hazards that might have claimed Gus, like dehydration or getting lost in the scrub. Police have tracked Benjamin's vehicle, but found no concrete ties to Gus's case. Yet the lack of clear trails in both amplifies the mystery, suggesting possible cover-ups or unreported incidents. The temporal overlap is bizarre. Benjamin and Gus both gone on or around September 26, 2025, forming an unusual cluster of vanishings in South Australia. Their locations in nearby outback zones add to the oddity, as do the similar search patterns. Extensive ground coverage revealing hints but no resolutions, eventually tapered off. Authorities in South Australia are probing both, with Benjamin's car investigation ongoing, but without solid links. It leans toward random coincidence or something more concealed. The absence of strong evidence in each case heightens the intrigue, hinting at third-party involvement or shared environmental risks, though experts speculate without confirmation. Both incidents drew national scrutiny, with theories floating about outsiders or mishaps, but nothing pins them together definitively. And that leaves us wondering, could Benjamin really be connected to Gus Lamont's fate, or is this just a cruel twist of outback chance? Wrap up this case. As we compiled this, the parallels to William Tyrrell struck us. Both boys vanished abruptly in Australian countryside, with sparse witnesses and family-centered narratives. For Gus, the harsh outback amplifies the mystery, making an accident Chile scenario plausible. The silence from the Lamonts, unbroken through months, fuels this, as does the fruitless tech-aided searches. Experts' input on positions yielded nada, leaving the case hanging, a stark reminder of how remoteness can conceal truths. In the end, what will be the outcome of Gus's case when we had a sad precedent just a few months ago? The case of Gus Lamont reminded us to another case, which also had the prime suspect, was the closest people to the victim. It's the case of Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Lilly and Jack Sullivan. Diving deeper into the police investigation process, a case that unfolded just a few months ago, the disappearance of Lilly and Jack Sullivan has highlighted the urgent and ongoing crisis of child missing persons cases today, and moreover, how far authorities can push in handling situations like this. We began compiling details on this for our channel, starting with the basics of who these kids were and the setup of their home life. Lilly Sullivan came into the world in March 2019, making her 6 years old when she vanished. Her younger brother, Jack Sullivan, was born on October 29, 2020, so he was 4 at the time. They lived with their biological mother, Malia Brooks Murray, her partner Daniel Martell, who acted as a stepfather, and their 1-year-old sister Meadow. The family resided on a rural property along Gairloch Road in Lansdowne Station, Pictou County, Nova Scotia, Canada. This spot was surrounded by thick woods, steep embankments, and dense underbrush, the kind of terrain that could swallow up small children in minutes if they wandered off. The events leading up to their disappearance laid out a routine family day that quickly turned ominous. The kids stayed home from school on Thursday, May 1, and Friday, May 2, 2025 because Lilly had a cough, and they had also missed Wednesday, April 30, due to a teacher professional development day. On April 30, the family went grocery shopping and got back home around 10:11 p.m. The next afternoon, on May 1, they headed to New Glasgow, where security footage captured Jack and Lilly with the family at a Dollarama store at 20:25 p.m. Brooks Murray initially told police she put the children to bed at 9 p.m. that night, but she later adjusted that to 10 p.m. She mentioned Martell stayed up after she went to sleep, but couldn't say when he came to bed. Early the next morning, at 6:15 a.m. on May 2, Brooks Murray marked the kids absent from school due to illness. Lilly was last described wearing a pink sweater, pink pants, and pink shoes. Jack had on blue dinosaur shoes. The disappearance itself happened on May 2, 2025, from their home in Nova Scotia, possibly in the Lansdowne or Pictou area, amid a household environment that raised flags for chaos, with suspicions of domestic violence where relatives like Malia exhibited aggressive behavior, and overall supervision seemed lax. Parents or family members faced suspicions of mistreatment, tied to a history of violence. The child protection system fell short in spotting early signs of mistreatment, especially for kids who might be autistic or otherwise vulnerable. The grandmother, Janie Mackenzie, lived in a separate building on the property. The biological father, Cody Sullivan, was estranged. The maternal grandmother was Cindy Murray. In pulling together these pieces, we saw how the remote setting amplified risks, much like in other rural cases, where kids slip away unnoticed. But the family dynamics hinted at deeper issues that police would soon probe quietly. The search efforts kicked off large-scale right after the report on May 2, involving over 100 officers and volunteers using ground teams, dogs, drones, and helicopters by May 3. By May 4, that number swelled to 160 people combing the area. But the operation scaled back on May 7 after no traces turned up and no confirmed sightings emerged, with officials concluding the children were unlikely to be alive. A renewed search on May 18 brought in 115 volunteers plus police. Additional pushes continued in the following weeks, including efforts up to May 30, yet nothing significant surfaced. By June 11, the investigation encompassed over 11 RCMP units, including the Major Crime Unit and Crime Analysis Service, with hundreds of hours of video from surrounding areas collected. Broad searches lack progress, complicated by public speculation and misinformation, similar to patterns in the Gus case. Criticism mounted over the early drawdown on May 7, while volunteer efforts persisted. Police advised the family against speaking to the media, which drew backlash for stifling transparency. Handling details like surveillance footage faced scrutiny. As Martell noted, it could impact the probe. The investigation seemed slow to link signs of violence, contributing to stalled momentum. As we reviewed timelines, these points underscored frustrations with how authorities balanced urgency and caution, especially in a case where every hour counted for young kids in rugged terrain. A shocking turning point came when family members, including Malaya Brooks Murray, possibly referenced as Belinda Gray in some notes, though sources confirm her as Brooks Murray, and Daniel Martell spoke in interviews about being investigated and undergoing lie detector tests from the very first days of the case. Brooks Murray told reporters on May 3 that she was holding on to hope and wanted the kids home soon, describing the night of May 2 as the worst without them. On May 4, Martell pushed for monitoring borders in New Brunswick and airports. By May 30, Martell expressed ongoing hope in an interview, confirming surveillance footage from Dollarama, but cautioning that location details could harm the investigation. The maternal grandmother, Mary, spoke on May 6, sharing hopes and prayers while noting police advised the family against media interactions. Interviews covered at least 54 individuals, some with polygraph tests. On May 6, Brooks Murray left the area to stay with relatives and block Martell on social media, signaling a rift. The RCMP initially viewed it as wandering with no evidence of abduction, as stated on May 2. On May 28, they publicly revealed a sighting from May 1, later confirmed as the Dollarama via footage. A June 11 update tailed intensive efforts, polygraphs, video analysis, and tips. In August 2025, redacted court documents, released after requests from outlets, showed that by July 16, the RCMP no longer treated it as criminal. Officials stated no evidence of abduction, but hadn't ruled out suspicious circumstances. The probe ran quietly with national agency partners and item seizures for testing. By June 11, 488 tips had been received and assessed, with legal warrants to seize and examine documents and devices. Corporal Sandy Matheru led the effort, emphasizing a coordinated approach to information review. Early on May 3 at 12:45 a.m., Brooks Murray suggested the estranged father Cody Sullivan might have taken them to New Brunswick. Police visited his home at 12:50 a.m., where he denied seeing them in 3 years, and requested camera footage from Cobequid Pass on the Trans-Canada Highway. Cody Sullivan was contacted by police on May 3 and denied involvement. August court documents indicated thorough checks on the parents, suggesting no direct link. The way information was doled out highlighted tight control. An initial public statement on May 2 at 12:05 p.m. AT framed it as wandering. A missing persons alert at 40:55 p.m. for Pictou County asked the public to stay away. On May 28, they announced the kids were seen publicly with family on May 1. The June 11 update covered investigation status. To manage rumors, police urged the family to avoid media, kept details under wraps, and released info in drips like sightings and probe updates. In October 2025, a reward climbed to $150,000 from the Nova Scotia government for valuable tips. The case remains unsolved, with wide attention in Canada and beyond. This quiet investigation raised questions about how much police held back. From day one, while searches raged, they interviewed family under the radar, running polygraphs on relatives and seizing items without public fanfare. We noted how they vetted the biological father swiftly, but kept it internal, only revealing bits like the Dollarama footage weeks later after verification. The shift from viewing it as non-criminal by July stayed buried in court docs until August, forcing requests to unearth them. Tips poured in, but evaluations happened behind closed doors, with warrants for devices suggesting deep dives into personal data without announcements. The advice to family to stay silent fueled perceptions of control, potentially to curb leaks that could tip off suspects or spread false leads. In piecing this together, the pattern emerged: police balance visible searches with covert family scrutiny, releasing only vetted snippets like confirmed sightings or unit involvements. This drip feed, initial wandering theory, delayed footage reel, sparse updates, left gaps that bred speculation. For instance, the polygraphs on 54 people, including family, started early but weren't publicized until interviews surfaced. The August docs showed no criminal angle by mid-July, yet searches continued, hinting at withheld suspicions. Item seizures for testing implied forensic work on potential evidence from the home, but no details emerged. The reward bump in October came quietly, as if to reignite tips without overhauling the narrative. We saw parallels in how they managed the estranged father's check. A midnight report led to a 20:50 a.m. visit and highway footage request, all handled discreetly without immediate disclosure. This approach, probing relatives while projecting a standard missing kids search, sparked doubts about transparency. Did they suspect mistreatment or custody issues from the start, given the household's reported chaos? The family's silence, enforced by advice, amplified this, as did the mother's departure and social block. Police control over rumors meant squashing unverified claims, but it also meant holding cards close on polygraph results or analyzed videos. The investigation's stealth extended to national partnerships, suggesting cross-border checks without fanfare. By June, hundreds of video hours were under review, yet only broad updates surfaced. Warrants for documents and devices pointed to digital forensics, perhaps phones or computers from the home, but outcomes stayed sealed. This method, while protecting the probe, invited questions on concealed leads. For example, the non-criminal classification in July contrasted with ongoing efforts, implying perhaps a shift to accident or cover-up theories kept internal. The redacted docs, fought for release, revealed parent vetting but redacted specifics, leaving holes. In general, the cases we have discussed have one thing in common: there is still hope of finding the victim. However, the following case will be the worst outcome of the type of case we are discussing. The worst case involving a child you have ever heard of, the case of Emmanuel Harrow. Emmanuel Harrow, the worst case. This case began in the quiet community of Cabazon, California, within Riverside County. Emmanuel was a 7-month-old boy who vanished under circumstances that initially pointed to a parent's worst nightmare. His father, Jake Harrow, was 32 years old, and his mother, Rebecca Harrow, was 41. The family resided in Cabazon or a nearby area, living a day-to-day existence with multiple children, where Emmanuel, as the youngest, required special care typical for an infant of his age. From the outset, the disappearance was reported as a kidnapping, with Rebecca claiming she had been attacked in a parking lot, leaving her unconscious and her son taken right from under her watch. This setup placed the family in a rural pocket of Southern California, where such incidents feel particularly isolating, surrounded by desert landscapes and sparse traffic that could either hide clues or swallow them whole. The sequence of events kicked off around August 2025, when Rebecca Harrow made the initial report to authorities. She described stopping in a parking lot in Cabazon, perhaps for a quick errand or rest, when an assailant struck her from behind, knocking her out. When she came to, Emmanuel was gone, no cries, no witnesses, just an empty spot where he had been. This account triggered an immediate response, with local law enforcement launching searches in the surrounding areas, enlisting community volunteers to comb through nearby fields, ditches, and roadways. Deputies canvassed neighborhoods, checking surveillance from any available cameras in the vicinity, while flyers with Emmanuel's description, a small baby with specific needs, circulated to heighten awareness. The family portrayed a united front in those first hours and days, cooperating with investigators as the story spread, drawing in tips from concerned residents who scoured the region on foot and by vehicle. Jake and Rebecca expressed profound grief in their interactions with police and those around them, emphasizing the shock of losing their infant son so suddenly. Jake, in particular, highlighted his love for Emmanuel during early statements, underscoring the bond he felt as a father and the desperation to bring him home. The couple detailed how Emmanuel's routine involved close tension due to his young age, making his absence all the more heart-wrenching. Relatives and friends rallied, sharing in the pain, with some organizing vigils or search parties to keep hope alive. However, the family also faced added torment from threats and harassment following the report, as anonymous calls and messages poured in, compounding their sorrow and forcing them to navigate not just the loss but external hostility. We noted how this pressure built quickly, turning a private tragedy into a public ordeal, where every lead felt like a lifeline, yet the searches yielded nothing. No clothing, no signs of struggle, no indications of where the baby might have been taken. As days turned into weeks, the initial momentum of the searches persisted, with authorities expanding the radius to include nearby highways and remote spots, using dogs and aerial support to cover ground. Community members donated time and resources, walking grids in the heat, calling out Emmanuel's name in hopes of a miracle. The parents clung to the kidnapping narrative, recounting details repeatedly to detectives, while expressing frustration over the lack of progress. Jake spoke of sleepless nights and the constant replaying of what-ifs, while Rebecca described the void left by her missing son, her voice breaking in descriptions of his daily habits and smiles. This period captured the raw anguish of a family in crisis, with relatives like siblings or extended kin voicing their own heartbreak, pleading for any information that could reunite them. The case drew volunteers from farther afield, who joined in calming the desert fringes, but each empty day amplified the despair, leaving the Harrows to grapple with the uncertainty of whether Emmanuel was alive or in danger. Back to the case itself, it started to went wrong when we deep dive into the statements from Jake and Rebecca Haro, piecing together the inconsistencies that unraveled their initial story. Rebecca claimed she was attacked and knocked unconscious in a parking lot, waking up to find her 7-month-old son gone, but the investigation quickly uncovered discrepancies in her statement that made authorities question the entire account. For instance, details about the timing and nature of the assault didn't align with physical evidence or her own retellings, leading detectives to probe deeper without immediately dismissing foul play. In interviews, Rebecca was confronted with these inconsistencies regarding the alleged kidnapping, and police noted contradictions in her narrative about the events, such as varying descriptions of the attacker or the sequence of what happened after she supposedly regained consciousness. These gaps suggested the story might have been fabricated, shifting the focus from a random abduction to something more internal. Jake Harrow's involvement added another layer of doubt, as his early statements supported Rebecca's version, but contained their own mismatches when compared side by side. The parents' combined tale of a kidnapping was ultimately proven false, with both Jake and Rebecca facing charges of murder and filing a false report, implying their entire testimony was deceptive from the outset. This revelation came as police pieced together timelines that didn't match, including alibis that crumbled under scrutiny. The true crime angle here lies in how these conflicts often signal a cover-up in family-related incidents, where initial lies unravel to expose a grimmer reality. We examined how such discrepancies, small at first, like differing times or overlooked details, build into a web that traps the tellers, much like in other cases where parents stage scenes to deflect blame. The police investigation kicked off right after Rebecca Harrow's report of the kidnapping, treating it initially as a legitimate child abduction case with urgent searches launched for Emmanuel. Officers conducted immediate interviews with the parents, gathering statements that would later become central to spotting red flags. As they delved in, the process included confronting Rebecca with the inconsistencies in her account of the alleged kidnapping, which raised early suspicions of foul play. Detectives noted how her descriptions shifted slightly each time, prompting them to cross-check with any available surveillance or witness accounts in the area. Banu, they viewed it as a kidnapping scenario, but the probe soon pivoted to a murder investigation once the fabricated elements surfaced, culminating in the arrest of both parents around August 2025. This shift happened as evidence mounted against the initial story, with the focus narrowing on the family's dynamics while still pursuing leads on the reported abduction. The early stages emphasized gathering forensic details from the supposed crime scene in the parking lot, but findings there didn't support Rebecca's claims, further eroding the narrative. We traced how authorities methodically built the case by re-interviewing the couple, using techniques to highlight contradictions without tipping their hand too soon. The investigation also touched on Jake Harrow's background, though the initial emphasis remained on verifying the disappearance report before expanding into broader family history. Jake Harrow's past mistreatment came into sharper focus as the probe deepened, revealing a pattern that couldn't be ignored. In 2023, he had pleaded guilty to child mistreatment involving another daughter, inflicting permanent brain injury on the 10-month-old girl through severe actions that left her with lasting damage. Details from that case painted a picture of repeated harm, including injuries consistent with forceful handling that caused neurological impairment, underscoring a history of endangering young children in his care. This prior conviction highlighted vulnerabilities in the system that allowed him continued access to kids, feeding into the current suspicions. The arrests marked a critical escalation, with Jake Harrow taken into custody and eventually pleading October 2025. This plea came after initial denials, reflecting a strategic shift perhaps influenced by mounting evidence. Rebecca Harrow, meanwhile, pleaded not guilty to murder in October 25 and is awaiting trial, maintaining her stance amid the unfolding legal process. Jake's sentencing followed in November 2025, handing him 25 years to life plus an additional 7 years, totaling over 30 years behind bars. A stiff penalty that acknowledged the gravity of the offenses but left lingering questions about full accountability. As we sifted through the case files, the progression from abduction claim to murder charges illustrated how initial deceptions can collapse under investigative pressure. Rebecca's account of the attack, for example, included details about being struck from behind, but medical examinations showed no corresponding injuries that matched her description, creating a key conflict that police leveraged in confrontations. Jake's supporting statements echoed hers at first, but under separate questioning, minor differences emerged, like varying recollections of their activities leading up to the incident, which detectives used to build doubt. This methodical dismantling of their narrative is classic in true crime probes, where liars often trip over their own fabrications when pressed for specifics. Back to the investigation, the early police work also involved canvassing the Cabazon area for any corroborating evidence, such as security footage from nearby businesses that might capture the alleged assault. But nothing substantiated the story. Instead, the absence of such proof steered the investigation toward the home, where subtle clues about the family's routine began to contradict the parents' timeline. For instance, neighbors' observations didn't align with the couple's claims of normalcy before the report, adding to the pile of inconsistencies. We noted how this phase emphasized discretion, with officers avoiding public declarations of suspicion to keep the parents off guard while gathering more intel. For the most controversial question, that why Jake still walked free after the first case with his daughter. The past mistreatment case against Jake involved court proceedings where he accepted responsibility for the injuries, which included shaken baby syndrome indicators like retinal hemorrhaging and brain swelling in the 10-month-old. Sentencing in that matter had included probation terms that he violated by the time of Emmanuel's case, amplifying the tragedy of repeated opportunities for harm. This history informed the current probe, with investigators drawing parallels in the vulnerability of the victims. Jake's guilty plea in October came amid evidentiary pressure, avoiding a trial that might have revealed more damaging facts. Rebecca's ongoing not guilty stance suggests a strategy to distance herself, perhaps arguing complicity rather than direct action. His November sentencing, imposing the lengthy term, aimed to deliver accountability, yet the case's resolution feels incomplete without all pieces laid bare. For the status of Emmanuel Haro, efforts to find Emmanuel dragged on without success, with the remains never located despite extensive early searches involving community volunteers, police teams, and ongoing probes that stretched into late 2025. The victim is presumed dead based on the evidence that emerged, but the lack of any physical discovery left a void in the investigation, turning what started as a desperate hunt for a kidnapped infant into a grim acceptance of loss without recovery. In our review of the timelines, these searches included ground sweeps in the Cabazon area and beyond, using dogs and aerial support at first, then scaling back but persisting with tips and rechecks of potential sites, all yielding nothing concrete. The debates intensified around Jake Harrow's decision to plead guilty, without revealing where Emmanuel's remains are, sparking arguments that his agreement might have been structured to dodge harsher penalties like a capital charge or life without parole. Analysts we've looked at point to how such deals often incentivize confessions in exchange for leniency, but in this instance, it meant withholding key information that could provide closure. Jake's plea to second-degree murder and related counts came in October 2025, but his silence on the location fueled speculation that the prosecution traded revelation for a quicker resolution, avoiding a drawn-out trial where more disturbing details might surface. We considered the theories surrounding this plea deal, where Jake Harrow admitted guilt to sidestep a heavier sentence, yet refused to disclose the remains' whereabouts, denying the family any chance for proper burial or finality. This move aligns with patterns in true crime where defendants leverage knowledge as bargaining chips, but here it left lingering pain, as the agreement apparently didn't require full disclosure. The presumption is that by taking the deal, Jake secured a sentence of 25 years, to life plus 7 more, totaling over 30 years, rather than risking worse outcomes, but at the cost of perpetual uncertainty for everyone else involved. Justice in this case feels incomplete on multiple fronts. As Emmanuel's remains stay unfound, Rebecca Harrow awaits her trial after pleading guilty in October 2025, and the family grapples with no full closure. The ongoing wait for Rebecca's proceedings, potentially into 2026, means accountability hangs in limbo, while the absence of remains prevents any sense of finality, turning the resolution to a partial victory shadowed by unresolved grief. In piecing this together, the system's trade-offs become clear: a conviction secured, but at the expense of total truth, leaving debates about whether true justice requires every detail laid bare, or if partial punishment suffices in such heartbreaking scenarios. The lesson. We started compiling the common threads across these child disappearance cases for our channel, noting how family violence weaves through each one as a dark undercurrent, turning homes into places of chaos and cover-ups rather than safety. In the William Tyrrell case, the 3-year-old's vanishing from his foster grandmother's yard in 2014 highlighted issues in child protection and adoption services, with suspicions falling on relatives for concealing an accident amid a backdrop of domestic turmoil from his biological family's history of mistreatment and violence. This pattern of hiding truths to avoid scrutiny echoes in Gus Lamont's 2025 disappearance from a remote sheep farm, where complex family conflicts and a hazardous outback environment raised doubts about whether loved ones masked an incident tied to neglect or aggression. The Lilly and Jack Sullivan siblings case from May 2025 shares similar beats. With their sudden absence from a rural Canadian home, amid allegations of violence from figures like their mother Malia, and failures in child welfare systems to spot early signs of mistreatment in vulnerable kids, perhaps on the autism spectrum, Emmanuel Harrow's story stands as the worst-case scenario, where the 7-month-old's reported kidnapping in 2025 masked fatal family violence. With his father Jake Harrow's prior mistreatment history and possible maternal complicity underscoring repeated domestic harm and deception. Family abductions often stem from this violence, where non-custodial parents threaten or snatch children in retaliation during disputes, heightening risks for the kids involved. Across these incidents, domestic violence and mistreatment linked to factors like poverty, misuse of controlled substances, and mental health disorders, creating environments ripe for disappearances or cover-ups. Children witnessing develop behavioral, physical, and emotional issues akin to those directly mistreated, compounding the trauma. Parental kidnappings typically arise in custody battles fueled by this violence, leading to long-term damage for the children caught in the crossfire. As we pieced these patterns together, questions arose about how to effectively protect children in these volatile settings. Safeguarding kids requires an integrated system centered on the child, encompassing laws, policies, social services, monitoring, data collection, and community support to intervene early and prevent escalation. The roles of child protection systems vary by country. They connect social and judicial services from birth, with the EU emphasizing multidisciplinary integrated approaches, while Australia and others focus on prevention and intervention through diverse frameworks. But have these agencies truly fulfilled their duties? Progress exists in places like Poland with strict laws, yet gaps persist, with coordination failures and varying effectiveness across nations leaving many children exposed. The rise in child disappearance cases overall paints a troubling picture, with increases in some regions, around 100 stranger abductions yearly in the U.S., though family abductions numbered about 213,900 in 1999, and while certain mistreatment trends like mistreatment dropped 62% since 1990, fatalities rose 6% in 2022. Causes tied to family violence include poverty, controlled substances misuse, and mental health issues, fostering aggression and mistreatment. Annually, 3.3 to 10 million children witness this violence, elevating their risk of vanishing or harm. The sad outcomes manifest in behavioral problems like aggression and sleep disturbances, social isolation or bullying, emotional scars leading to depression, anxiety or PTSD, and long-term risks such as self-harm or perpetuating violence. Societal costs soar, with lasting trauma from abductions or exposure to aggression underscoring the devastating ripple effects. How can we strengthen child protection systems to better prevent disappearances linked to family violence? What roles do international organizations like UNICEF play in improving these systems globally? Have child protection agencies in countries like Australia and the US truly fulfilled their duties? Or are there systemic failures allowing violence to persist? In light of varying effectiveness, what reforms are needed to ensure consistent protection for vulnerable children across borders? Why do some countries succeed in child protection while others lag? And how can we measure true success beyond laws on paper? These cases illustrate how family violence not only precipitates disappearances but perpetuates cycles of harm, with children bearing the brunt through immediate dangers and enduring consequences. In William's situation, the adoption system's oversight lapses allowed potential risks to fester, mirroring Gus's remote farm isolation where neglect could hide aggression. Lilly and Jack's home chaos, with unaddressed violence signals, shows how mistreatment slips through cracks. Much like Emmanuel's fatal outcome from repeated domestic harm, family abductions amplify this, turning custody fights into high-stakes threats where violence escalates, leaving kids traumatized. The interplay of poverty and controlled substances misuse often fuels these dynamics, creating unstable homes where mistreatment thrives unchecked. Witnessing such acts imprints deep scars, equating to direct mistreatment in its toll on young minds and bodies. Safeguarding demands more than reactive measures. It calls for proactive, child-focused frameworks that blend legal enforcement with supportive services. Systems in various nations aim to bridge kids to equitable aid, but disparities abound. The EU's collaborative models contrast with fragmented approaches elsewhere, raising doubts about universal efficacy. Achievements in stringent policies coexist with shortcomings in implementation, begging evaluation of whether these entities meet their mandates fully. The uptick in disappearances signals broader societal strains, with statistics revealing persistent vulnerabilities despite some declines in specific mistreatment forms. Factors like mental health breakdowns intertwined with violence propel these tragedies, where 3.3 to 10 million annual witnesses face elevated odds of similar fates, and results haunt survivors with aggression outbreaks, social withdrawal, emotional turmoil, and cycles of harm that echo into adulthood, burdening communities with the fallout from unhealed wounds. As we wrap up this deep dive in these heartbreaking cases, there's a glimmer of hope that keeps us going in the true crime space. We've seen too many stories where family violence turns homes into danger zones. But with advancing tech like better forensics and AI-driven searches, we might see positive breakthroughs. Imagine DNA advancements cracking cold cases like William Tyrrell's or Gus Lamont's, or community alerts preventing another Emmanuel Haro tragedy. Law enforcement is ramping up collaborations across borders, and awareness campaigns are pushing for stricter monitoring in high-risk families. We hold out for those moments when a tip leads to resolution, turning grief into some form of justice, even if it's years down the line. That hope extends to praying for the victims still out there, waiting to be found. For kids like Lilly and Jack Sullivan, lost in that Nova Scotia wilderness, or Emmanuel Haro, whose remains elude discovery despite his father's confession, we pray for answers that bring peace to their families. These little ones deserve to be remembered not just as statistics, but as lives cut short by systems that failed them. In quiet moments, we reflect on their innocence amid the chaos, hoping search teams stumble upon clues that end the uncertainty. It's a collective wish that no more children suffer in silence, and that ongoing efforts yield the closure so desperately needed. Today's analysis draws to a close here, but we've only scratched the surface of the mysteries out there. Countless cases linger, with unsolved riddles, victims whose stories demand to be told to spark change. From hidden abductions to overlooked mistreatment, these tales remind us why we keep digging. Join us in the next video as we explore more enigmas, shedding light on the forgotten and pushing for accountability. Until then, stay vigilant, and let's keep the conversation going, because every voice counts in protecting the vulnerable.